Stranger Things 3 is pretty good. No, I'm just kidding. I'll admit right off the bat that I did actually think that this was quite a good season, and I don't have that much to say about it in way of analysis, because I can't really be bothered writing a fully scripted video about this, and because my thoughts aren't particularly deep. This is going to be a relatively impromptu, almost addendum epilogue to the very, very long review I did of the second season. If you haven't seen that, then a lot of this isn't really going to make a lot of sense, so I'd highly recommend watching that first. You can find a link to that here / in the description. Pretty much all of the complaints I outline in my review of the second season are just dealt with here and really work, and are the things that make the season fun and enjoyable, in my opinion. Now, when I'm talking about these things, they're gonna sound really basic, and they are. They're the basic things you just need for a story to work and to be fun. When it works, it's just a fun, lighthearted, enjoyable show, and there's not particularly much to talk about beyond that. It doesn't have delusions of grandeur about exactly what it is, so there's no reason to treat it like anything more than that. But just as a refresher, since I uploaded the second season video like 10 months ago without having uploaded really anything else since. Anyway, the major problems I had were these. I didn't really like episode 7, and I thought it kind of fucked with the whole season structurally. Secondly, I thought the season lacked a central narrative drive, but particularly that its inciting event, aka the thing that gets the plot started, happens way, way, way too late into the show, i.e. it happens at the end of episode 3, kind of start of episode 4, which is like halfway through the show. Thirdly, I thought that Mike and Eleven were underutilized, but I would probably rephrase that to say that they're main characters who lack agency, and there is a difference with that. For example, a character like Lucas is very background for pretty much all the seasons at this point. He doesn't have a huge amount to do, so that's not so much of a problem for me, even though it'd be like, okay, it could be nice for his character to be fleshed out. The problem for me, at least in the second season, was that Eleven is given a lot of screen time, and she's supposed to be doing stuff, but at the same time, she doesn't have enough agency to actually really change much, so it's just boring and nothing is really happening around her character. Fourthly, I thought that Billy was just a kind of bizarre addition. He was basically a cliche regression of Steve's character. He kind of didn't add anything to the story in any way. I thought his whole backstory was really tacked on and not very well handled, and I thought his whole not liking Lucas because he was black thing was just like very bizarre, very out of place. Maybe it could have been good, maybe, but the way they handled it, I was really not impressed by it. And fifthly, why can't Australians say fifth, maybe it's just me. And number 5, I thought most of the characters just generally had very weak motivations, arcs, reasons for being in the show. For example, Eleven is just kind of withdrawn from the world for not really any real reason. I talk about that extensively in that video, so I won't retread that ground, but all of my points just kind of boil down to this. It would be much more fun for us to see Eleven actually interacting with the main characters. Withholding her from the rest of the characters ends up A, being arbitrary, and B, just isn't really fun to see. Again, this is something that happens in the third season. She gets to interact with the other characters, particularly Max and Mike, and it's great. It works really well. It's the sort of thing that you wanted to see in the second season. I also talk at length about Billy in the second season video, and about how his kind of whole character is just very odd. He doesn't really have much to do besides like be a dickhead and like a racist or something. But when you watch the third season, you kind of go, oh, his character exists to be possessed. He exists to have this redemption arc. It makes perfect sense in the context of the third season. When you're watching the second season and you're not having that narrative structure to kind of house his character or house any of the other subplots, they feel like these weird, dislocated things. And I think that's almost what I was trying to get at for that entire video series, was basically, why is any of this happening? Anyway, I was talking about Billy's backstory thing here and how it really doesn't work in the second season. It's just this kind of like clunky scene that's just thrown in to sort of explain why he's an asshole, and it's like very lazy is how I would describe it. But at least in the third season, the whole Billy flashback thing is turned into a visual, cinematic thing. It's turned into a thing that's actually visually interesting. It has kind of compressed meaning and symbol. Although definitely I would have preferred his character to have at least a little bit more depth before he dies. Anyway, I've talked long enough about the second season. Why is the third season good? Well, it just works. Like I said at the beginning, pretty much everything that the second season does wrong, I think works here. For one, the central narrative drive is immediately set up in the first scene. It has a cold open, it works perfectly. We see the Russians, they're building some sort of great campy like space laser thing that's gonna open the gate, and then they go, okay, you've got 1 year to build this. Awesome. That's the scene, that's the whole plot. The whole plot basically revolves around there. It slowly gravitates towards that as an event, and the whole season is concluded when they deal with that thing and the Russians. The season is definitely of a slightly different tone. It's clearly emulating a kind of different genre of films, especially with the whole Russian subplot thing. That whole subplot is very, very camp. The set looks like something from Power Rangers, even though it was probably extraordinarily expensive to make. Now, me personally, I think that's actually kind of a fun way to branch out the, tone of the show and do something different. I can definitely respect why people wouldn't enjoy that, or why they would feel, I suppose, betrayed in a way, in that they would feel like, damn, this season just really isn't doing the things that I kind of came to like the show for, that I came for. Although even then, I feel like the other subplots kind of are gonna like scratch that itch in a sense. Particularly the Nancy Jonathan subplot, that's very classically Stranger Things. And even what the rest of the kids are doing is far more in line with the first season than with the second season. And similarly, or kind of bizarrely, the show is also maybe the darkest of the 3 seasons. Particularly in regards to the gore, I found it like very effective and great. Not particularly overly violent, although this season has just a mass of people being flung across rooms and shoved into walls. Like, my god, it probably happens about fucking 30 times. I love the way that the Mind Flayer is made a corporeal, tangible thing here. I can't really emphasize enough how weird it is in the second season that it is basically this like metaphysical, intangible ghost thing. Although I know that the Duffers were trying to go for this whole Lovecraftian thing, it really doesn't work in a show like Stranger Things. Here, making the Mind Flayer possess people who have characters and can do things physically in the world and can threaten our characters physically, and then B, having the Mind Flayer have a kind of physical, tangible form, it means that they can actually like have fun action set pieces. Because otherwise, how do you do action set pieces in the second season? Well, you go, okay, the Mind Flayer can make demo dogs, and then that's just really fucking boring. They're just these CGI dogs for the characters to fight. It doesn't look particularly good, even though I'm sure it cost a lot of money, and generally, in my opinion, was quite boringly handled. Season 3, on the other hand, kind of like completely plays to its strengths. Like I said, having the Mind Flayer be corporeal and having it have the ability to possess people basically means that the characters can like actually discover mysteries about it. They can interact with characters like Billy. You can have interesting developments, like the fact that the newspaper that Nancy and Jonathan work for starts to have possessed people work there. You can then have cool action set pieces like the one in the hospital or the action set piece that they have in the house. It all means that there's actually like things that can happen. This isn't some revolutionary idea. I mean, things happening in stories is like generally a good idea to have that. But it's just mostly because in the second season, I feel like because the Mind Flayer is so disconnected from reality, like literally it's in another fucking dimension, you just can't have this interaction with it. Whereas here, you can have this giant fucking gore flesh monster chasing the characters down, and it's great. It works really well. Plus, having human antagonists in the form of the Russians works super well. In this same vein, you actually have people for the characters to confront, to come up against. Human people, humans interacting with humans, not humans interacting with fucking CGI dogs or incorporeal Lovecraftian monsters. The best example is the very Spielberg-esque Terminator Russian dude that is kind of Hopper's little antagonist for the film. When looking at the Indiana Jones films, Plinkett calls these guys the Muscle. It's kind of like the physical antagonist that you know that Hopper is going to have a fight with. And again, it leads to a bunch of fun action set pieces. You have the directly stealing from John Wick House of Mirrors sequence. You have that fun sequence where they pick up Alexei and it's the, is Hopper gonna shoot this guy? Then you have the set piece at the end, which is like almost shot for shot taken from Temple of Doom, but whatever, it's sci-fi, so it doesn't count as stealing. I'm definitely jumping all over the place here, but just generally speaking, the storytelling in this season is so much more visually vivid. And of course, film and television are visual mediums, so on and so forth, but really what that means is you can just compress meaning down and scenes down so much when they're told visually, and they're so much more potent in pretty much every way because of that. I particularly noticed visually and both storytelling wise just how many exteriors are in this season, and really just the breadth of the locations. When I'm recalling the second season, to me it feels very claustrophobic in a not good way, not in a psychological way. I feel like all of it just takes place in kind of boring blue-gray interiors. In continuing with the fact that this season does all the things right that season 2 did horribly, I'm shocked that the whole relationship between Eleven and Hopper is actually great here. In fact, it's almost certainly the most emotionally affecting part of the season. The fact that they immediately in the first episode turn Hopper's kind of anger, frustration, confusion into a psychological issue is smart. It's what they really should have done in the second season. Although I won't go into it fully because, again, I've already talked about this at length. I feel like Hopper in the second season acts in a way that I feel like is entirely out of character and in a way that isn't explained. Now, some people will immediately disagree with me off the bat and say, aha, but Hopper actually acts out of character in the third season. Well, I would say he certainly acts differently, but I feel like it's all justified within this kind of psychological framework.
Maybe you just kill Mike. I'm the chief of police, I could cover it up.
We have that scene very early on where he is expressing to Joyce that he has really no way of expressing himself.
Like a heart-to-heart.
A heart-to-heart? What is that?
He hasn't really been able to deal with Mike and Eleven's relationship and Eleven growing more distant and those kind of teenage parent growing pain sort of things.
Hey! Hey!
And the fact that they immediately have a fucking scene about that shows you how his fucking character is interacting with that psychologically and the reason for his behavior. Although you can kind of intuit it and make up, I don't know what you would call them, excuses, I guess, for his behavior in the second season, because it isn't psychologized and because it isn't something that the character actually works through. For me, it just ends up being bizarre and boring narratively. It means that, at least in the second season, Hopper just acts like a fucking crazy dude, and it's never really something that he, deals with as a character. Whereas in the third season, when it works well, it ends up being the most emotionally affecting part of the season. He has a nice little arc with it, and of course, the whole ending speech he gives is one of the best moments in the series to date. At the same time, I can definitely see why people would feel like his character was a little flanderized. I feel like maybe they play up him being a bit dumb, or, maybe it's a little bit over the top.
Here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna drive you home. And I'm gonna speak. And you're going to listen.
For me, his behavior in the second season is far, far less explainable or excusable or really interesting to look into.
You are like Papa!
Really? I'm like that psychotic son of a bitch?
Oh, all right. You wanna go back in the lab? One phone call, I can make that happen.
I feel like him just kind of being a drunk dad, kind of semi-loose cannon sort of character is fine, and just because it's turned up a little bit here, I think is pretty much in line with the rest of the tone of the season. The way they build the emotional relations between the kids in the first couple of episodes just really helps to strengthen the core of those characters for the later episodes. I particularly like what they did with Max and Eleven. I feel like it would have been very, very easy and obvious to have them kind of have a rivalry. So doing the complete opposite where they immediately become friends, A, is fun to see, B, it shows us a different side to Eleven, and C, it actually makes Max a kind of interesting character. I also really like the addition of Robin's character, and I feel like the whole twist with her being a lesbian is perfect. It's basically the perfect way to do that. The whole bathroom scene reveal thing, I would almost actually like do a scene analysis of this. I think the whole way that it's shot is really clever. The fact that they're separated at first and the whole blocking with them coming under the doors and over and da-da-da-da-da. It just works so fucking well. It's just such a well-crafted scene. The reveal is such a nice little twist, but it doesn't ruin their relationship as their characters. It just ends up being that they're still really good friends. And she's a lesbian. Okay, cool. In terms of complaints, they're relatively minor and not particularly analytical. As I mentioned before, maybe with the Will subplot and maybe Billy a little bit, I feel like some of the subplots could have used a little bit more refining or a little bit more fleshing out to kind of be complete and maybe be a little bit stronger. I'll also say that my other main critique of the Mind Flayer still stands, that being that it doesn't really have an interesting motivation. In fact, it doesn't have a motivation at all as far as I can tell. There's a scene that seems like it's kind of gonna start to do that. Billy is confronting Eleven in the kind of void dreamscape.
Don't you see? All this time we've been building it. We've been building it for you.
And you think it's gonna kind of at least hint more at what its, larger ideas are, but then it kind of doesn't, and you really just get the sense that either it's pure evil, which is really quite boring, or the Duffers really don't actually know what they're doing, and it's a kind of, it's just mysterious because its motivations are mysterious, but maybe it's just kind of doing like a J.J. Abrams Lost mystery box. There actually is no fucking answer. We just set a thing up and then actually it doesn't have a payoff. So I do have a kind of feeling that it's getting a little late to explain what this thing actually wants or what it's doing and so on. The season still works without us knowing what that is, but it's the sort of thing where the later and later you delay it, proportionately the harder it is to actually have a good or interesting payoff in time, if that makes sense. And that's pretty much it for my thoughts. Like I said, nothing here is like particularly analytically dense. And of course, Stranger Things, when it works, is not a very deep or complicated show. And of course, it's not setting out to be like that. I'd probably have to see it again, but at least when I finished it, I was kind of wondering if I even preferred it to the first season. I definitely, after letting it settle, probably was slightly less hyped about it, and now I would probably rank it maybe a little under the first season. But really, for me, it's an almost perfect sequel to Stranger Things 1. And I say a perfect sequel to Stranger Things 1 and not Stranger Things 2 because it feels like it builds upon all of the things that Stranger Things 1 set up, whereas Stranger Things 2, basically, in my opinion, fails to build on all of the things that Stranger Things 1 sets up. Now, when I say perfect sequel, I don't mean perfect film. I mean a pretty much bang on what you would want from a sequel season. It is bigger, it's more expansive. I feel like the actual budget, particularly in regards to CGI, is used well. It isn't just put into like boring CGI dogs. It feels like it's used effectively. I feel like all of the sets and the exteriors and all the set pieces they do are all good expansions of that initial kind of idea. Sure, the tone definitely changes. Some people aren't going to want to come along for that ride, and I can understand why if you're really attached to that kind of genre and characters and tone, kind of that exact thing that they're going for. I can see why it becoming more camp, kind of colorful, lighthearted, maybe more action-oriented would really put you off. Ultimately, I just thought it was a fun, good season. Really, that's about it. Anyway, I'll only be making Stranger Things content for the rest of all recorded history, and no other content besides that, so see you in 3 years. Bye!